Welcome to The Real Debate. I'm John Stossel, moderator tonight. CNN's hosting its first presidential debate for 2024, but they did not include the independent presidential candidate, Robert F. Kennedy Jr. So this evening, live from Los Angeles, we're streaming the CNN debate, and here I will give Kennedy the same questions that Trump and Biden get. You'll see the CNN debate, plus Kennedy's answers here. And this is all being hosted on Twitter, X we're supposed to call it, and therealdebate.com. But you could say this is the real debate with all the presidential candidates who poll in double digits. Due to the inclusion of Kennedy's answers, this broadcast will be a little bit longer. Now, let's go to CNN as they introduce their broadcast. And please welcome Robert Kennedy Jr.
Gentlemen, thanks so much for being here. Let's begin the debate, and let's start with the issue that voters consistently say is their top concern, the economy. President Biden has said that prices remain high. Since you took office, the price of essentials has increased. For example, a basket of groceries that cost $100 then now costs more than $120. And typical home prices have jumped more than 30%. What do you say to voters who feel they are worse off under your presidency than they were under President Trump?
Mr. Kennedy, the question was, people feel worse off because of inflation.
And I want to thank everybody for being here and for this opportunity, and thank you, John. I also want to thank Elon Musk for live streaming this on X. CNN made some statements suggesting that might be, that he may get sued for that, and I'm very, very grateful for the courage that he's shown to protect freedom of speech in this country. I want to just orient us a little bit about why we're here tonight, and I don't want to make it sound like I'm complaining, because this isn't a personal issue. This is something that should be very troubling for our country. What happened with this debate? My uncle gave the first televised debate in 1960. Ever since then, the debate has been run by nonpartisan organizations, the League of Women Voters till 1988, and then the Debating Commission thereafter. And this is the first time that a private corporation owns the debate. And it's troubling because CNN is making tens of millions of dollars from this debate. And so they have an incentive to go ahead and collude with the two presidential candidates whose main purpose was to keep me off the stage. And again, this isn't a personal issue. This is something that's important for our democracy, because Americans feel like the system is rigged. And this is this collusion with a corporation, for-profit corporation, that both those campaigns are going to be pumping in tens or hundreds of millions of dollars in advertising. So it's all a big payoff. This is exactly the kind of merger of state and corporate power that I'm running in order to oppose. And the Americans believe that the system is rigged against them, because it is. And this is an example of how badly rigged it is.
Mr. Kennedy, we're following the rules here. Your 2 minutes are up.
You can do whatever you want with the minute that we give you.
It's your show. You should get an introduction.
I got to follow up.
We're going back to the debate.
I got to follow up, right?
Well, I'm going to ask you a follow-up. You can do
not
whatever
according to the whoop person in my ear here.
Tariff on all goods coming into the U.S.
He says the question was, prices are higher because of Trump's 10% tariffs.
And this is another example of why this debate is a problem, because these two men are the people who ran up the deficit that is causing the inflation. President Trump came into office promising to balance the budget. Instead, he spent more money in office than every president in United States history combined, from George Washington to George W. Bush, 283 years of history. President Biden will beat him. He's already run up $6.3 trillion in debt, and by the time he leaves office, he'll have run up more than President Trump. That's why we have inflation. Inflation is caused because they're printing money to pay for these expenses that we don't have, and that money is then a tax on the poor. That's why we have a 22% hike in home insurance. That's why we have $4 milk, $4 bread, $6 gasoline. It's because of the forever wars and the out-of-control spending by these two gentlemen. We have a $34 trillion debt now. The interest alone on that debt is costing us more than our military budget. Within 5 years, 50 cents out of every dollar that we collect in taxes will go to servicing the debt. Within 10 years, 100%. This is existential. This is one of the problems that neither of these two will talk about. This is the reason that they need me on stage, because I would confront them with what they did. They were the ones who ran up half of this deficit is attributable to those two men, and that's what's causing inflation. We'll never deal with inflation if we don't deal with the money printing problem, and neither of them are going to do it.
Money printing. Back to the debate. Mr. Kennedy, to give you the same question, before they veered off, the question was taxes. Trump says lower taxes, more stimulus. Biden says higher taxes, more money comes.
Thank you, President.
Well, President Trump is, I think, right. He did have a strong economy, but anybody can have a strong economy by borrowing $8 trillion because you're forcing our children to pay for our present-day prosperity with this enormous debt, which ultimately is paid by the poor, by people with fixed incomes. I want to address the area that they veered into, which is COVID management. This is another illustration about why this is so problematical, because these two presidents shut down every business in our country. 3.3 million businesses with no due process, no just compensation. 41% of the black-owned businesses that they closed will never reopen. There was no scientific reason to do this. There was no public hearings. They made a bad mistake, and that was the worst financial mistake in American history. They shifted $4.3 trillion upward to this new oligarchy of billionaires that he was talking about. They created a billionaire a day in 500 days. And one of the problems is that CNN was their biggest cheerleader. Oh, and the same company, BlackRock, the same company, the biggest shareholders, the company that owns CNN are BlackRock, State Street, and Vanguard. Those are the same companies that own Pfizer. Pfizer's the biggest advertiser. So they were all in cahoots in telling us what we needed to do, and we ended up having the worst record of body count of any country in the world. We had 16% of the COVID deaths under these two presidents. We only have 4% of the world's population. Oh, I don't know why people are getting awards or they're all patting each other on the back. We literally, whatever we were doing was wrong, because everybody else in the world did better than us.
CNN questions.
This is
Your position on Roe v. Wade.
I've spent probably more energy protecting medical freedom than any other leader in this country. And bodily autonomy. So I think that abortion should be the choice of a woman, and that I worry about state involvement until the baby reaches viability. And I think the states have an increasing viability outside the womb, and I think the states have an increasing interest in protecting that child. My policy on abortion is called more choice, fewer abortions. And that's because 52% of the abortions in this country, the woman says that economic considerations played the key role in her decision. Every abortion is a tragedy. Many women don't want to have abortions. Over half of them have them because they do not believe that they can care for that child for financial reasons. I don't think that should happen in this country. I have a child care program. As I talked to you before, every dollar that we spend on weapons provides about 2 jobs. Every $1 million that we spend on weapons provides 2 jobs, creates 2 jobs. Every every $1 million that we spend on child care creates 22 jobs. It's good for our economy. It's good for choice. It's good for limiting abortions, and that's what I'll do as president.
To give you the same question, Mr. Kennedy, should there be any limit on a late-term abortion?
Yeah, I believe it should be limited. Late term should be limited. Absolutely, that's what was permitted under Roe v. Wade. That's what every European country has the same law, and that law makes sense. If that baby is fully viable outside of the womb, the state has an absolute interest in protecting it.
Mr. Kennedy, what would you do about the border?
Well, I would say that on this one, President Trump is more right than President Biden. I think almost everything that President Biden said, I know to be not to be true, including his claim that he was endorsed by the Border Patrol. And the border, there's been at least 7 million people who've come across the border, and they've come across principally, and this is without the gotaways, which are another 2 million. So those are the people who don't go through the gaps in the wall. President Biden, when he became president, ordered a stop on the construction of the wall. That's the problem. There are 27 gaps in the wall, and I stood in Yuma, Arizona between 2 a.m. and 4 a.m. in the morning, and I watched 300 people come across, and I interviewed half of them. The first 110 came from West Africa. They're young men of military age. The second 110 were from Asia, from Azerbaijan, from Nepal, from Tibet, from Bangladesh. Most of them were from China. None of them, only 2 people the entire night that I interviewed had asylum claims. Only 2 people, and they were both the only people from Latin America, from Colombia and Peru. I think what President Trump is saying, I don't know how many terrorists have come across. I know the Border Patrol is extremely worried about that. And what's happening is not sustainable. President Biden ordered the deconstruction of fences, the censoring systems were taken down. I can't tell you why. The long-distance cameras were taken down. The night lights were taken down. So there was some decision in the administration to open up the border, and then the 2 laws that were changed under President Biden, and this is the day that he came in, the catch and release law, and
Time is up. Sorry. Back to the CNN debate. Mr. Kennedy, the question which neither candidate answered was, there are millions of undocumented immigrants in the country now. What would you do?
Well, I want to comment on their digressions because I think President Trump is right that there's a lot of bad people coming across. I think that's undisputed, and we're seeing rises in crime that are associated with the immigrants. But more importantly, there's just a sheer number of them, and I think a lot of the Democrats allowed this to happen out of a humanitarian impulse, out of the impulse of compassion. But when you're actually down there and talking to people, it's not a compassionate solution. The people that I talked to, many of them have been extorted, they've been exploited, they've been robbed, they've been raped. We have an immigration policy in this country that is now being run by the Sinaloa drug cartel. The Border Patrol takes, because they've been ordered not to do their job, they're, catch and release, they bring them to the Yuma airport, put them on a plane to any destination they want. This is true, it sounds like hyperbole, but it's not, and they pay their ticket. And then they get reimbursement from FEMA. It's insane. There's 110,000 immigrants now in New York, and President Trump's right, they're being put up at hotels. Many of them are on the street. They have a asylum court date 7 years in the future. They can't legally work, so they're taken advantage of by predatory employers. We're paying them $6 or $8 an hour, and those employers are bidding against union shops who are getting paid $35 or $50 an hour, and the union shops are losing the bid. They are camped out in Randall's Island on the playing fields where the children are supposed to be playing for sports. Those fields were closed during COVID. So these kids, these wonderful New York City kids, were scholarship tracked, could not play their sport, and their lives were, and now the same thing's happening. They can't play their sport because there's immigrants.
Time is up here. Now, 3 candidates did not answer the question. Back to CNN. Mr. Kennedy, the original question, if anyone remembers it, it was a good one. You say you want to negotiate with Putin. What if Putin says, just let us keep the territory we have and don't have Ukraine join NATO? Acceptable?
That is Putin's, right now, his opening bargaining position. Putin has been asking to settle this war from the beginning. In fact, he agreed to 2 separate treaties, the Minsk Accords, in 2019, which Zelensky ran in 2019 and ran promising to sign the Minsk Accords. And really the only thing Putin wanted was to keep NATO out of the Ukraine. He then, in 2022, right after he first invaded with only 40,000 troops, when President Biden said there is absolute baloney, President Putin did not go into Ukraine intending to conquer Europe. He only sent 40,000 troops. It's a nation of 44 million people. He didn't even want to take Ukraine. He wanted us back at the negotiating table. Zelensky asked the United States to help him negotiate a treaty with Putin. And Biden administration said no. Zelensky then went and asked Israel, and Naftali Bennett, the former prime minister, said yes, and Erdogan in Turkey said yes, and they negotiated a beautiful treaty in Istanbul in April of 2022. They signed the treaty. The one thing that Putin wanted was that we didn't put NATO in Ukraine. He didn't want to conquer Europe. And they signed it. Putin was withdrawing his troops, leaving Donbass and Lugansk. And what happened? President Joe Biden sent Boris Johnson over to Kiev and forced Zelensky to tear up that agreement because they had another agenda, which is to weaken Russia. President Trump was part of it. President Trump gave the first $1.3 billion to Ukraine in 2017 of the first offensive weapons. He then sent Mike Pompeo over there in 2019 to say that we're going to put NATO there. And then he walked away from the intermediate range nuclear treaty with Russia unilaterally. We had a nuclear weapons treaty that we wouldn't put intermediate missiles in Ukraine or the other former Soviet satellite states. And President Trump walked away from it. So the two of them are equally culpable in the provocations that led to this war. And I'm not excusing Putin. Putin didn't need to go into Ukraine. And he should be held responsible too. We need to look at our responsibility, and it falls both on the backs of President Trump and President Biden.
Again, Mr. Kennedy, you may have forgotten the original question, which was, as president, what leverage would you use to get Hamas and Israel to end the war?
Well, I would have used more diplomacy from the beginning. I think we have to recognize a couple of things. One is we're a nation of compassion. All of us are heartbroken by seeing the bloodshed that's happening in Gaza. All of us are affected and horrified by the injuries to the civilians in Gaza and the damage to innocents in Gaza. We also have to understand that Israel is in an existential battle now, and that Hamas, which is a genocidal organization, which is pledged to Israel's annihilation, it's pledged to the extermination of Jews. And it does not want a two-state solution. It wants a one-state solution, which is Israel gone. And it actually has in its charter a provision that says that it is against Islamic law to even negotiate with Israel. Israel's in a 5-front war with Hamas, which is a proxy of Iran, with the Shia militias in Iraq and Syria, with Hezbollah, these are all proxies of Iran. in Lebanon and with the Houthis in Yemen. And it's being attacked on two fronts right now. It is at full war with Hezbollah. And we have to let Israel disarm Hamas. We have to support them. Israel's our oldest ally. It is the only democracy in the Mideast. If you can imagine what a world would be like without Israel, for the first time in 80 years, people are entertaining that possibility. And in 5 or 10 years, Israel may not exist because they're no longer dealing with weakened forces that they were in the 2000s and 1967 and 1956, et cetera. Hezbollah is the most proficient guerrilla army in the world, probably in history. Iran is now a superpower in the Mideast and has the capacity to maintain a war. So we need, and to wipe out Israel. We need to support Israel, but we need to use diplomacy, and the people in the White House are not capable of doing that. We need to bring in President Xi. We need to bring in President Putin. We even need to be negotiating with Iran. And the neocons in the White House see this as us as a bipolar world where the United States is dominating the world and won't negotiate with anybody. And that is the problem that caused this.
Back to CNN. The question was actually, would you support an independent Palestinian state?
I'd like to answer the NATO question. I think that
You've got 2 minutes for what you do with it.
NATO, when NATO was created, it was a bulwark against Soviet expansion. President Eisenhower said in 1959, if we do our job with NATO, it will be gone in 10 years. And NATO has now become an instrument for the neocon ideology, which is the ideology that is bankrupting our country. It's bankrupt. We have a huge military budget. We have double the military budget that we had in real dollars than at the height of the Cold War. That money is not being used for self-defense. That money is being used for world domination and to make America the policeman of the world. NATO is the instrument of that. I'm not going to abolish NATO. I'm going to change the function of NATO so that it becomes an instrument of peace and not an instrument of U.S. global domination abroad.
Would you support an independent Palestinian state?
I think that has to be decided between Israel and Palestine.
Back to CNN. Okay, well, January 6th obviously doesn't apply to you, but when would you bring in the National Guard?
Well, let me comment on what they were saying. I don't know if President Trump obstructed the orderly transition of power, which is one of the keystones of American democracy, and if he did, and he should be punished for it. He should be held accountable. But to me, there's a larger issue, which is that both these presidents swore to uphold the Constitution. They're both wearing American flag pins on their vests, on their lapels. That's easy to do. That's an accessory. That's an accoutrement. It's a badge of patriotism. But real patriotism means protecting the United States Constitution. And and both of them subverted the right to free speech, the most important right. President Biden, 37 hours after he took the oath of office, was ordering social media sites to censor his political opponents. I'm not just talking about me, and I'm not just talking about COVID, but on all kinds of issues like Ukraine, et cetera. This has never happened in American history. He opened a portal. The FBI, the CIA, CISA, NIH, DHS, the IRS, and other agencies to go in and tamper with social media sites to take out things that were not politically palatable. They violated freedom of worship, the two of them, by shutting down every church in this country with no scientific citation. They violated freedom of assembly with mass regulations that, again, The top scientist in this country, Anthony Fauci, admitted to Congress 2 weeks ago that they were not scientifically based. They shut down the Seventh Amendment right to jury trials by saying you couldn't sue somebody who was involved in COVID countermeasures, no matter how negligent that corporation were, the biggest corporations in the world. No matter how reckless their behavior, no matter how grievous your injury, you could not sue them. They shut down 3.3 million businesses with no due process and no just compensation in violation of the Fifth Amendment. They shut down the Fourth Amendment's prohibitions against warrantless searches and seizures with this track and trace surveillance. That was the all-out assault on the Constitution that we've never seen the likes of that at any time in American history. And I don't believe they have the right to wear those American flag pins. That is...
Back to CNN. Again, the question doesn't really apply to you, but what do you think about the lawsuits against Donald Trump?
Well, here's what I say. President Biden made the point that it's wrong for a federal official to use his federal governmental powers. It's an abuse of power to use that to punish or disadvantage his political opponents. President Biden is doing that every day. They've denied me Secret Service. President Biden, I'm the first candidate since my father was killed. When my father was killed, Secret Service became available to political candidates prior to the convention. 33 political candidates have been given that prior to the 100-day cutoff, 120-day cutoff, and most of them with polling number a tiny fraction of what I have. President Biden, I am the first candidate since 1968 to request Secret Service protection in which it's been denied. And that is a way of weaponizing the federal agencies to punish a political opponent. I think President Trump was right. I'm not a fan of President Trump. I'm running against him. I think he was a bad president. But he's right that it's shocking that 51 CIA agents signed this document saying that the Hunter Biden laptop was a Russian hoax. And they were accusing the Russians of tampering with our election. It was actually the CIA tampering with the election. I want to say this too. President Biden is now deployed, he's got $3 billion from big corporations in this country. He's using that corporate money to sue me in virtually every state to keep me off the ballot. That's not democratic. We all, President Biden, a couple of days ago, let me just finish this. President Biden was criticizing and ridiculing Vladimir Putin for getting 88% of the vote in Russia.
Kennedy, I'm going to hold you to the time limit.
Let me just finish this point. The way that Putin got 88% of the vote was by censoring his opponents on state-owned television, all the national TV networks, and by making sure they didn't get on the ballot. We should not be doing that here in this country. We should be an example of something better.
I should also add something we are doing that I don't think we should be doing. We said the rules would be the same for you as for them. I've been asking my ear to give you more time, but I don't think that's right, so I'm going to stop doing that. Back to CNN. Again, there's no parallel question for you in there, but let me ask, of these two gentlemen, who would be worse as president?
I mean, I think you put your nail on that. You put the hammer on that nail perfectly. 70% of the American public say they don't want this contest because neither of them are running on the things that are absolutely critical to Americans right now. The only thing they have, the only argument they have is be scared of that other guy. He's a felon. He's a bad guy. He's going to destroy the republic. They're running on fear. If Americans want to vote out of fear, they're going to vote for these guys. If they want to vote out of hope, they're going to vote out of me because I want to talk. I want to talk about the fact that 71% of the people in this country are making less than the cost of basic human needs. I want to talk about the fact that under their administrations, The top 1% of Americans now own more than the 60% that represent the American middle class. Our country has utterly changed because of them. I run into elderly people who are cutting their prescription pills in two to make it through the week. Mothers who are downgrading their purchases at the grocery store to make it out of the checkout line. A couple in New Hampshire who told me they're in their bedroom or in their living room with a crying baby, arguing with each other about whether that baby is $50 sick or $100 sick or $500 sick before they bring it to a hospital. These are kids who come up to me every day and say that one day a week, they have to choose between buying gasoline and buying lunch. These are choices you're not supposed to have to make in this country. And it's them, these two, who are not telling the American people how they're going to get our kids into homes. And that's what I want to talk about.
Back to CNN. So trying to pass on a similar question, I don't know why they single out black people, but it's certainly true that some minorities in America do not do as well as us white people. And should government do something about that?
And I agree with the assessment that inflation is disproportionately hurting black people because they're wage earners. They've got disproportionately fixed income. The border is disproportionately hurting black and Hispanic workers. I hear that every single day. I spent 10 years working with Cesar Chavez during the last part of his life. He had two issues. One was pesticides, the disproportionate impact of pesticides on Hispanics. The other issue was the border, because he understood all of these illegal immigrants coming across the border were hurting the capacity of his workers, American workers, to get good jobs and wages. The issue that they didn't talk about, two issues. One is education. We spend $50 billion a year on the Department of Education, and black kids in this country, it's a crime what is happening to their schools. When I was a kid, we had the best educated kids by every measure of any country in the world. We're now 22. We're throwing billions of dollars, and in inner city schools, most of these kids cannot read or do math at grade level. It is a crime. We need to give them choice. We need to give them charter schools. Neither of them have done anything about it. The last issue, which both of them have aggravated, is the mass incarceration crisis. 1 out of every 4 black men has had some contact with the correctional service. And 60% of the blacks in American jails are there for nonviolent drug offenses. Why? Because President Biden passed the Drug Act in 1986 that he wrote that gave 100 times the penalty for crack cocaine as powder cocaine. It was designed to put blacks in jail. Then he passed in 1994 omnibus crime bill with the super predatory provisions, the mandatory sentencing, the 3 strikes you're out. Those 2 bills doubled the amounts of blacks in American prison. The amounts of blacks in American prison were steady from the Civil War till then.
Back to CNN. Oh, this is frustrating. This is your specialty, but I object to CNN's biased question. Would you take any action to slow the climate crisis? That assumes climate change is a crisis. So do you think it is? And what would you do?
I think that climate change, first I want to say this. There's been nobody who's ever run for president of the United States and gotten anywhere. Well, let's say, I'll even say it more definitively, who has a strong environmental record and a larger commitment to the environment than I do. It's what I've been doing for 40 years. I believe climate change is existential, but I don't insist other people believe that. And I think I focus, and I've always focused on market-based solutions, which I think are the most efficient, eliminating subsidies for the energy industry, particularly carbon. We give carbon $5.2 trillion in subsidies a year, and creating a national grid system that is robust enough to do long-haul transportation of electrons. And we turn every American into an energy entrepreneur, every home into a power plant with the cheapest, most efficient forms of energy. The market, we need to start by protecting habitat, our air, water, wetlands, soils. That's the most important thing you can do for climate. It's almost altogether ignored. President Biden's program, which is the Inflation Reduction Act, does a few good things, but the bulk of it is large subsidies to the oil industry and to BlackRock and other really sinister corporations for carbon capture, which is a boondoggle. Carbon capture is a boondoggle. We should not be funding it. We should not be encouraging it. We shouldn't be encouraging any kind of geoengineering of that kind. We should be focusing on restoring our soils, doing regenerative agriculture, protecting our air, our water, our wildlife, stopping the carbon discharge from coal-burning power plants, which are causing $500 billion in respiratory injuries annually, poisoning every freshwater fish in our country with mercury.
Sorry, your time is up. Back to CNN. Again, a very important question, Dodge. Social Security is going bankrupt. Taxing the rich more won't solve it. What would you cut? Or what would you do?
Well, I agree with you. And Social Security is not an entitlement. Social Security is a contract. Workers put 6% of their income into a fund, and they're told that at 65 they're going to get that money back. It's not an entitlement. It is contractual, and the government. The United States government would be outrageous if the United States government did not live up to its full faith and credit of paying back those obligations, even if it has to reach outside of the Social Security system to get it. And what we need to be doing is winding down our military commitments. We need to unravel the war machine. We need to solve our chronic disease epidemic, which is the biggest cause, $4.3 trillion. And we can do those things very quickly. I'm going to cut the military budget in half during my first 4 years. I'm going to use AI and blockchain to eliminate waste in government to save more money. And I'm going to get rid of the chronic disease epidemic. And ultimately, that's going to save us a lot of money. And this has to be a priority for us. I also want to say this, that I was astonished by President Biden's claim that we have the best economy in the world. We have, I see kids every day. None of this generation is going to get into a home. And that's going to destroy the American middle class. The American middle class, the greatest economic engine in the history of mankind. When I was a kid, our country owned half the wealth on the face of the earth. And it was largely because, one, we had an industrial base after World War II, but most importantly, we got every American into a home. And because they were in a home, they had equity, they could borrow money, they could bet it on a business.
Back to CNN.
And that's what's going to drive our economy.
Back to their original question. CNN has somehow found a child care crisis in America. Somehow Americans raised children for years. Now there's a crisis because it costs too much. Is that something government did or can fix?
Well, the reason there's a crisis is because the economy with the middle class is gone. So in order to pay for a home, you need 2 jobs or 3 jobs. So oftentimes I'm running into people who have 4 jobs between the couples. A couple used to be when you and I were growing up, mom stayed at home or a parent stayed at home and took care of the kids. That doesn't happen anymore. Now, both parents, in order to hold on to that home, need to be working. So we do have a child care crisis in this country. And it's because of the destruction that both these men contributed to of the American middle class, and neither of them is offering any way to restore the middle class. Child care for Black Americans, John, is 37% of income, a single child. Oh, and nobody can afford that. And what I'm going to do, I'm going to wind down, I'm going to balance our budget, which is what President Trump promised to do, but I'm actually going to do it because why? because it's existential. If we don't have the courage to do that, no matter what the cuts are, we have to do that, or we are going to cease to exist as an influential nation. And but we cannot cut our way out of this debt. We have to build new industry. We have to build GDP. And one of the most efficient ways of building GDP is through childcare, through guaranteed childcare. There's a 22 times return on investment. As I said, every $1 million we spend on military weapons creates 2 jobs. Every $1 million we spend on childcare creates 22 jobs. And we need to grow our way out of this budget death spiral. And one of the ways we're going to do that is by providing childcare, by taking away $500 billion from the military.
Back to the CNN debate. I like it when they cut them off on CNN. The question is, we do have a big opioid problem, people in crisis, people overdosing, but also people in pain who can't get pain relief because doctors are afraid of the DEA. What would you do?
Both of these presidents miss the point. They're talking about drug interdiction at the border. That's not the problem. In fact, even if you sealed the border, or virtually sealed it, fentanyl occupies such a tiny volume, about 1/200th of other opioids. You could bring enough fentanyl across the border in a briefcase to kill everybody in Los Angeles. So the fentanyl is going to come in this country. The problem is something much larger than that. It's a generation that is alienated, that is dispossessed, that is depressed, that is suicidal, that is disconnected from community. And that's why they're turning to drugs. And we need to deal with that problem, and we need to reduce demand. And that my signature policy
Thank you.
is to begin taxing marijuana federally, to deschedule it from Schedule 1, where it is now, where the federal government is not allowed to tax it. So marijuana is legal in many states, but the federal government cannot collect taxes on it. It's legal. It's not going to, whether you can tax it or not, is not going to affect the number of people who are using it or amount that's used. We're going to deschedule it so the government can start collecting taxes. That will raise $8.5 billion in revenue. I'm going to dedicate that money to building drug rehabilitation farms, wellness farms, restoration farms in rural areas all over this country where any American can go for free to deal with depression, suicidal behavior, alcoholism, drug addiction to illegal drugs, but also addiction to SSRIs, to benzos, to Adderall. We need to reclaim our children. We have a whole generation that's growing up with social media, that's growing up with no hope for their future. They can't get into homes. They can't get meaningful jobs.
2 minutes, Mr. Kennedy. Back to CNN. Merciful when they cut them off now.
All I'm going to say is I hope they let me on the stage for that contest.
What do you do to stay healthy? What do you do to stay healthy?
What do I
do to stay healthy?
What do? I hike every day. I go to the gym every day. I don't ever eat processed food. And I do intermittent fasting, and I try to eat well. So I feel like I really want to be part of that contest.
Back to CNN. And that's it for the CNN debate. This is your forum. You get the final word. But just one observation is that listening to them, America is in terrible decline. But I don't see people risking their lives to leave America or to go to many other countries. They want to come here. And you say the middle class is disappearing. It's true. It's getting smaller. But the data show mostly because they're going into the upper class. I think America is doing pretty well, and we just need you politicians to leave us alone.
I do want to make an observation about President Trump's final point, which I think is a very, very important point for Americans to understand. We are closer to nuclear war right now than at any time since 1962. This week, we did something extraordinary that was hardly covered by the press, which is we fired a missile in coordination with Ukraine into a series of missiles into Crimea with cluster bombs, which every nation in the world except for us and North Korea says is a war crime. We dropped them on a civilian population, people who were sitting sunning themselves on a beach, and we killed a lot of children. And the previous week, the Russians are in Cuba firing missiles because they've warned us. We are going to lose the war in Ukraine. Well, I've said that from the beginning. We cannot beat Russia and the Ukraine. They cannot allow themselves to lose that war. They've been invaded 3 times through Ukraine. The last time they were invaded, the Russians Hitler killed 1 out of every 7 Russians. They're not going to let us put NATO in Ukraine. They cannot do it. It's absolutely critical for their national security, and we need to recognize that. And we are pushing toward a war with a nuclear power that says they will use nuclear weapon if they're pushed to the edge. They have 2,500 more nuclear weapons than we do. They have better defensive weapons, and we cannot fight a world war anymore. Because of hypersonic missiles, we couldn't get 1 million men across the Atlantic. Even worse, we do not have an industrial base like we did before World War II. We can't create weapons anymore. We create small numbers, but nothing like the Chinese or the Russians. This is something that every American needs to understand how close the incompetence of this administration has brought us to war.
Closing
shut
statements
up,
now.
but
We have closing statements from.
Can I say a closing
You'll get your closing statement right after they get theirs. And he ran out of time. Mr. Kennedy, 2 minutes, closing statement.
In 2013, there was a poll taken that asked young people under 35 in this country, are you proud of the United States? 85% said yes. The same poll taken 5 months ago, 18% said yes. So somehow, during the administration of these 2 presidents, an entire generation of Americans has lost pride in our country and a hope in their own futures. And they feel that way because they see what's happening. They can't get into a home. The first generation in history in America that is going to live worse lives than their parents. They see the vitriol that you saw here, the division, the polarization that makes them disgusted with politics. They're seeing the corrupt merger of state and corporate power that has transformed our agencies from the CIA, the health agencies, the environmental agencies, into sock puppets, the industries they're supposed to regulate. They're seeing the destruction of our soils, the destruction of our air and water. They're watching this happen, and the politicians do nothing about it except for hate on each other. If you want more of the same, you should vote for President Biden, President Trump. You know what's going to happen. You know that. They're going to give you 4 more years of the same stuff. If you want things to completely change, you're going to support me because I'm going to change everything. And this is a moral fight. This is a moral battle for the soul of our nation, to restore our moral authority around the world by projecting economic power abroad rather than spending $8 trillion on regime change wars that have left every nation we've touched worse off than we found it. And restoring our moral authority here at home. The first day in office, you heard what they're going to do. You don't even understand it. Here's what I'm going to do. Day 1 in office, I'm going to issue an executive order saying any federal official who tells a lie to the American public will lose his job. I'm going to stop I'm going to stop the surveillance state. I'm going to stop the propagandizing by our agencies of the American public. I'm going to unravel the war machine. I'm going to unravel the corrupt merger of state and corporate power. I know how to do it. I've been litigating against these agencies for years, and I'm uniquely suited to do this. But I can tell you, I'm going to do these things when I get in there. I'm going to make sure that our Constitution is protected, that AI is deployed to make government more transparent rather than by government to enslave the rest of us. I'm going to bring AI home and blockchain home because we need these new industries to grow our way out of the debt crisis. This is something that these two aren't even talking about. But if you want everything to change, you'll support me. If you want to vote out of fear, you need to support one of those guys. If you want to vote out of hope, out of inspiration, out of pride in your country, out of restoring the moral backbone of our people and our nation, you should vote for me. Thank you very much.
The crowd here obviously is very supportive of this candidate. Thank you for watching this different kind of debate. I don't know what you learned, but to me, the most reliable gauge of who does well on a debate is election betting. And I can report after this debate, Biden is down 13%. Trump, Gavin Newsom, Kamala Harris, and Mr. Kennedy are up. Thank you and good night.